Welcome into today's episode of Coach's Corner. Jordan Woodruff with you. Glad to have you along. Today's episode brought to you by RCB Bank, and we're joined by Kylee Jackson, athletic trainer. Got a chance to talk to her kind of before everything got started. Now you're in the midst of everything. In fact, a
Yeah.
couple of sports have actually gone into
Yeah.
off season now,
Yeah.
but you got football still going in season, and then
hmm
winter sports are getting up. So it's kind of a transition time, right?
Yeah, definitely. There's no like real clear off season for me because everything kind of blends together. Winter sports started official practices on the first of this month, so they're kind of starting to come in just as volleyball and softball are leaving, and sub varsity football wraps up this week. Cross country, most of them will wrap up this week. The kids that go to state have another week, and then they're done as well. But the bodies keep getting replaced by people in different sports.
All right. Injury wise, I know you can't go into details on
Right.
specific injuries because of these rules that we
Right.
have, right? And I'm not going to put you in that situation, but what's it been like overall this year as far as what you've seen compared to other years? Do you think it's been one of those crazier years or maybe a
It's
little better?
it's been a weird year. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that we don't usually see a lot. I've seen a lot of wrists and forearms and elbows, which is really unusual, especially in the fall. And I'm seeing them like I'm not seeing them from softball, which would be normal. I'm seeing them from like swimming, and sports where you're like, okay, I wasn't expecting that. But then we've got kind of the standard. You always have a lot of ankle sprains. You always have a lot of knee stuff. We're slower on concussions this year, which is good because last year for us was a crazy concussion year. But it is really interesting to kind of sit back and like look at the patterns, and because you kind of always fall into a rhythm. And last year was a high concussion year. The year before that, we had a lot of shoulder stuff. So it's kind of interesting. So far, the pattern has been mostly ankle, elbow, forearm.
Yeah, and with that, is there a reason that the patterns change, or is it just kind of like is it potluck
I
basically with what
yeah,
happens?
I don't really know that there's a rhyme or reason to it. I think it's just one of those things. Um, you see enough kids throughout the year. Things are going to kind of you look for the patterns and you notice them because that's just kind of what people do. And you see enough people, you see enough stuff. Eventually, even the stuff you don't see as often will eventually pop up, and you kind of just cling to those. Like I say, elbow forearm's a pattern. There's only been, maybe five, but before that I had five spread out through 3 years. So to me, that's a pattern. But I don't really know that there's a set reason. If they all were in a certain sport and they were all getting the same thing, we could maybe look at, how they were training, where they were training, things like that. But it's been so kind of random that I think sometimes it all just kind of clusters together.
All right. One thing I want to ask is athletic training, strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's a separate thing, but they're very important, and also it's important kind of to work together because
Right.
without a good
Mm-hmm.
strength and conditioning program, kids are going to get hurt in there. I want to talk about the relationship between that because I feel like the stronger that relationship is, the more beneficial it
Right.
is for
Yeah.
the kids because what they do in strength and conditioning
Mm-hmm.
also can be kind of a precursor to maybe train certain stuff so they
Mm-hmm.
don't get hurt as much. Talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So it's always important to collaborate. And I've been really lucky here in that all of the strength and conditioning coaches we've had have always been really open to my input and wanting to work together and kind of building programs together. Um, and it's always nice because I can give kids rehab and I can say, hey, if you're having issues in the weight room, you can do this, or you can talk to now Mike and Amy, and they'll figure out modifications you can do so that you're still lifting, but we're also working on injury prevention and injury rehab as well. And I mean, I like Mike, I like Amy on a personal level, so that helps a lot. Because there are times when like I can work with a person, but I don't necessarily like them. And so it's always helpful when you have a good kind of relationship with them before they step into the strength and conditioning role, because that makes it easier to work alongside them and kind of come at things with two different angles. And that just really kind of helps overall, like holistically, with especially the rehab process, but also injury prevention.
All right. Last time we talked here on Coach's Corner, we talked about you being in the classroom
Mm-hmm.
and also being the athletic
Mm-hmm.
trainer, the hours. outside of just for your sanity, talk about the benefits now that you've transitioned to just being the full-time athletic trainer and you're outside of that classroom
Right.
setting.
I think the biggest thing is that I am no longer behind on injury documentation. So everything that I do, whether I hand out an ice bag or put a Band-Aid on a kid, has to get documented into rank 1 as an athlete contact. And when you're seeing 30, 40 kids during 7th hour, it can be really, really hard to find time to document all that. And, like I wouldn't want to stay late because I'd been up there since 7:30 in the morning. And, we had a game and it's 10 o'clock and now I've got, 55 injuries to put into rank 1. And like, I don't want to do that that late. So that's, I think, the biggest benefit. It's also giving me time. I'm looking over the AEDs throughout the entire school district, not just athletics. And we've been working on getting the ones that need to be replaced, getting extra AEDs to certain schools, like the high school where you've got a very large school where maybe 1 or 2 AEDs is just not enough. And that benefits not just our athletes, but all of our students as well as the faculty at those schools. I am working on getting, I have hard copies of our emergency action plans that have been laminated now. I'm going to hang them throughout the athletic facilities so that anybody using a facility will know how to respond. Because, you get sports like tennis or even baseball where a lot of times it's one coach and all of the kids. Well, what happens if it's the coach that has the medical emergency? Does a kid know what to do? Do they, have enough forethought to go get me if it's during the school day, or to, call 911 or whatever? Well, now that's going to be up where they can see so that they don't have to, figure it out on their own. They can read what they need to do. So really it's kind of looking at less, on-field management and more kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff that helps keep everything going.
2 things in that. AED.
Mm-hmm.
Explain that to everybody, but then on top of that, talk about the importance. You hope you never have to use it, but talk about how important that is to have, not only in the high school setting, but middle school, junior
Mm-hmm.
high, and having those settings and what it means and what it could mean as far as saving a life.
Right, so an AED is an automated external defibrillator. It's usually in a little portable case. It's got the pads. You stick them on, you turn on a button, and it tells you when to push the button again to administer a shock. So you use it anytime you've got somebody who's unconscious and not breathing. The machine does all the work. Again, there's very little room for user error. The electrodes show you exactly where they belong on the body. The machine will tell you, to stand back so they can analyze the heart rhythm, and then they'll tell you, push the button to administer the shock. Very, very simple to use, even if you're not trained to use it. If you're not trained, the hardest part is figuring out how the machine opens, honestly. And those are really important. There's a lot of data that says, the best way to ensure that somebody who does lose consciousness stops breathing. The best indicator of, them living through that incident is rapid AED usage. And the gold standard is within 2 to 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, their chances of surviving drops by 10% for every minute that follows. And anybody can have a cardiac episode. We see that in sports a lot. They're called sudden cardiac arrest. One of the preseason classes and trainings we have to take is about what to do in a sudden cardiac death scenario. So anybody that's active or even not active, a lot of people go their whole lives without learning that they have a heart condition until they collapse one day. So knowing that, like, not only on the athletic side that, those are available, but also on the academic side, because, our schools are filled with students who don't play a sport, knowing that they can still have access to that is really, really important because, your elementary schools go through PE. And I think everybody does PE. Middle and high school, we still have PE. So you still have kids that are doing activities during the school day, but even just sitting in a classroom, they could have a heart problem that nobody's detected yet, and they could just fall over in their desk. So having that AED on site, easily accessible so that we can, deploy it when needed is really critical.
The other thing, and this kind of leads into the AED part of it, but you talked about the emergency management type plans, what to do in those situations. Training. I mean, you're only as good as what you can also train and communicate with others. So what do you do in the department of communicating maybe how to use the AEDs, which are pretty simple once they get a grasp of it, but also how to educate as far as coaches, here's what you need to do in these situations. Talk about the importance of that and what you're doing there.
Well, a requirement of employment is that we have up-to-date CPR, first aid, AED training. I'm actually next week going to get instructor certified so that I can start doing those courses in the summer for our coaches specifically, but I'll help out wherever's needed. So that handles a big chunk of like, when do you start CPR? How do you do CPR? When do you use the AED? How to do the AED? But also the emergency action plans. Every coach gets a copied email to them, hard copy as well. And then, like I said, I'm going to hang hard copies throughout the facilities, and it'll tell you where your closest AED is, and it'll give you more than one option in case, your first option isn't available because, somebody else has it or what have you, because every sport doesn't get their own personal AED. Sometimes, there's some overlapping. So, lots of options depending exactly where you are. And it goes through kind of step by step. It starts with you call 911, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. I've got a picture of, like a Google Maps view of the facility, and it shows you here's where you should tell the ambulance to go. Here's where you need people to walk EMS in to the facility to take them specifically to the emergency site. It's really, really detailed and thorough so that all you have to do is read that sheet of paper and you have everything covered so that if, like you're late in the year hire and you didn't go through all of like my preseason stuff, you can still figure it out on your own very, very easily with, no big time commitment because, every minute counts in these scenarios.
Yeah. And the last thing, you can't be everywhere at once, as we know. So it's important that the coaches, everybody knows. But also, there's things going on at different schools. Talk about the athletic training community in the state and the communication you can have. Maybe if a team's playing at a school, and maybe you can ask and say, "Hey, can you help me out with this?" Or they can say, "Hey, can you help me out?" That happens quite a bit, right?
Yeah. Athletic training is honestly a pretty small profession, especially, amongst 6A high schools, which is where you're most likely to see an athletic trainer. Once you get below the 6A level, it's more and more rare the smaller the school. And I have really good personal relationships with most of these 6A athletic trainers in the state because we all just kind of end up in the same places at some point. Right. And then, before I worked here, I worked at another 6A school. So if I didn't meet them through Ponca City, I met them through my previous job. And a lot of times, it'll be like, hey, I can't travel with this team to you. Let me know if they need anything. I'll have other athletic trainers reach out, say, hey, I've got kids that need taped. They'll have a med bag with them with supplies. If somebody gets hurt, I will, text their athletic trainer and be like, hey, so-and-so did this. When freshmen and JV went to Deer Creek, their athletic trainer let me know that, a kid was going to come see me on the next day because he'd gotten hurt during a game. So it is really a small community, and we do our best to kind of keep in touch because we know that, we're not all the Broken Arrows or the Owassos where you have so many athletic trainers on staff that they can travel. Even if they're not solo athletic trainers, most schools only have, a couple, and it's still not enough for you to cover everything that you've got going on at home, as well as send somebody with everybody that's gone. So it is kind of a patchwork amalgamation, and then we do our best to kind of make sure we cover for people who can't help us out.
And like most things, communication, information, two of the most important factors.
Absolutely.
Kylee, anything else you want to get out there before we let you go?
No, I don't think so. I think that kind of covers. I think at this point everybody has a good idea of what I do. So.
Good. Well, we're going to keep on and educating them more
Definitely.
and more. So appreciate your time. Thanks to Chris behind the camera as well. And Kylee, we'll catch you again later on.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. That was Kylee Jackson, athletic trainer here for Ponca City Public Schools. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Coach's Corner. It's been brought to you by RCB Bank. Until next time, Jordan Woodruff saying so long, and go Cats.